Hey everybody, I'm JC from One Shot Adventures, and today I'm going to resurrect an ancient TSR adventure, Lords of Darkness, and give it the quick, brutal review that it deserves. But then, I'm going to talk about how I rebooted one of the adventures in this book into something totally different, with Vikings. So, let's get started and learn how rebooting a bad adventure might lead to something better. So let's go back in time to 1987, when I was an eager young game master who bought Lords of Darkness for advanced Dungeons & Dragons. This supplement had so much promise. It was an anthology of short adventures, each of which focused on a single type of undead monster. This is such a cool premise. Every game master loves the undead. They're creepy, soulless horrors with cool abilities, and they always come built in with mysterious histories. And in game design, constraints breed creativity. So the more you focus in on a design, the more creative you have to be with it. So focusing on one monster type would inevitably force the game designer to use that monster in clever ways. So you can see why I couldn't wait to go home and run adventures from Lords of Darkness and see what the authors would surprise me with shadows and ghosts and mummies. Unfortunately, this book is a massive letdown. These adventures are the definition of rush jobs. Most of the adventures have generic setups, the undead monsters weren't used in creative ways, and some of them didn't even include maps. I won't go through each of them, but let's pick on a few. There's a skeleton-themed adventure in this book where the PCs have to keep watch on a graveyard. And then this crazy woman shows up and she just starts randomly resurrecting skeletons, and, well, the PCs then have to kill those skeletons. And that's it. At least this adventure gives you the piece of trivia that skeletons can't understand more than 24 words of a command in length. I guess necromancers invented Twitter. And then there's one that focuses on shadows. I love shadows. They're these creepy wisps of creatures that can appear from anywhere, so I figured the adventure was going to be filled with lots of ambushes and spooky surprises. Well, it isn't. The heroes are asked by a wizard to venture into a destroyed city to recover an old book. The wizard gives them a cube to help them find it, but he's actually secretly sending the PCs into the city to turn them into shadows with that cube. It's sort of a magical bomb, and there's something about the boundaries between the world being thinner there in the city. But his plan just doesn't work. The cube does nothing, and then all of a sudden the PCs are attacked by shadows in the middle of the city. And that's it. That's the end. One encounter, attacked by shadows, no stealth, no surprises, just a big wave of undead creatures, and that's the end.
Wait, don't you dare blame this adventure's problems on me. My plan was perfectly good. It's exactly how every evil wizard should kill players. Just send them into an empty city with a magical bomb. I have no idea why the author sabotaged my cube. This was a perfectly planned TPK here.
And then there's a haunted manor, which of course features the ghost. The house itself has a reasonably good history to it, which is something that's actually critically important to running any haunted house adventures, to give that house history. But as soon as the PCs find the ghost, he just unleashes on them and attacks them and fights to the death. So discovering all that history of the house and figuring out what happened here is kind of useless because he's just a bloodthirsty monster who just kills people on sight in the end. The mummy-themed adventure, well, it's okay. It's a tomb, kind of like what you'd expect, and it does have a giant Tyrannosaurus Rex skeleton in it, but I'm a sucker for both mummies and dinosaurs, so I'm pretty sure when I say I thought this adventure was okay, it's probably a massive overstatement. Now, in 1987, TSR was having a rough go of it. They were just pumping out product as fast as they could, and there's really nobody around to pay that much attention to quality, but really that's no excuse for this rush job. But for some reason, I kept this book after all those years, and every few years I would just flip through it and wonder maybe I'd gotten it wrong and there was a hidden gem in here. So far, I've been disappointed, and honestly, I would just skip this book and go find a great Dungeon Crawl Classics adventure instead. Now, I've written a lot of adventures for my blog. I think I'm almost up to 30 free adventures there that you can go download. But sometimes, like any other game master or writer, I get into a creative rut. Sometimes I just don't have a great idea for a new adventure. So sometimes, to refresh my creativity and hone my game design skills, I find one of these old bad adventures and I reboot it. I try to find the flaws, expand the missing pieces, and just modernize it a bit. A lot of times the adventure comes out completely different than the original one. Rebooting an adventure helps me reconnect with the game designers of the past. After all, the hobby's changed a lot in the last 30 or 40 years, and my perspective is going to be very different than the perspective of these writers who wrote adventures in the very early days of role-playing. And it uses a completely different part of my creative brain, taking and sawing away and hacking at somebody else's adventure to turn it into something that I like. It's just very different than writing your own adventure. So this month, I was kind of stuck and I was in the mood to reboot an adventure again. So I pulled out Lords of Darkness and went through it and found an adventure that wasn't great, but I felt like I could take the concept and really run with it. So let's talk about The Tombs of Thar, Steve Perrin's adventure from this book that focuses on the Wights, these intelligent undead spirits that return from the grave with a hatred for the living. Now, there's not much to say about this original adventure. Like the other ones in the book, it's pretty short, mostly a sketch. But the setup describes how a caravan accidentally found a lost valley, camped out there, and several workers got dragged away in the middle of the night. The caravan fled, and when they meet up with the adventurers, they naturally advise them to go check out the place.
While you're examining my caravan's wares, it occurred to me to tell you that we recently found a lost valley. Several of my men were dragged underground. We didn't investigate why, we just ran, but perhaps you'd like a map there.
At least the author also suggests to the game master to give the PCs a personal stake, like maybe one of their relatives was one of those caravan workers that was snatched away in the middle of the night.
Oh, and I probably should have mentioned, I think it was your brother that was dragged underground.
When the PCs arrive at the Lost Valley, they find several barrows connected with tunnels. There are 7 tombs here, and they're filled with, well, wights. There's also a big boss wight too, and he has a name and a magical sword, so I guess he's special. While the adventure recommends that maybe the wights will creep out from their tombs and terrorize the players at night, the reality is it plays out much more straightforward. I ran this one like decades ago for a small group of players, and really, we discovered there's not much to do other than arrive at the Lost Valley and go right into those tunnels. And each of the barrow locations in the tunnels just really aren't described separately. There's no traps or pitfalls or any interesting differences between them. So this means once the PCs go underground, they're just going to kill about a dozen wights, then kill the king wight, and then take his kingly stuff. It's a pretty standard hack and slash adventure in a hole in the ground. Worse, there's no sense of history to these wights. I mean, they have this whole barrow complex set up, and who are they, and why are they undead, and there's just no sign of that. And the caravan workers, those missing people, like did the players find them? No, they're not really mentioned either. I guess maybe they got turned into zombies by the wights, but zombies aren't even mentioned anywhere. So it really is kind of an unsatisfying ending other than to go and kill the wight and claim his magical sword, which is actually pretty good. So you can tell The Tombs of Thar is pretty bare bones. But I actually like some of the core elements. I think wights are a cool, underused monster, and venturing into unexplored ancient barrows with a history is kind of a creepy, cool concept. And I like the idea of a constrained setting to better guarantee the players just jump right into the action and can finish this adventure in a couple of hours. I decided that The Tombs of Thar was getting a reboot, and that I would build around the structure that already existed. So let's talk about what I did to reboot this one. The final voyage of Draengr Thar is a Viking-era adventure inspired by The Tombs of Thar. You can download it for free, and there's versions available for Dungeons & Dragons, Call of Cthulhu, and GURPS. Now, the fact that I just said Call of Cthulhu will give you a hint on how I leaned into the horror elements of this one. The adventure also includes pre-generated characters, handouts, and VTT assets, so you game masters can just get started right away. So to reboot the original adventure, I first examined why it felt so undercooked. First, the world didn't feel lived in. These tombs had no explanation or setup, and like I said before, undead should have a history built into them. Wights had lives before they became undead. So I felt that my reboot needed to add history and mystery to this adventure. I wanted to slowly reveal the wights' past and creep the players out while I do it. Next, this adventure is about the undead, so I wanted to double down on the horror aspects. The original adventure just felt like a dungeon crawl, but I wanted my version to feel more like something that would work in Call of Cthulhu, which meant leaning into those horror tropes. I also wanted to make sure the wights stayed really scary. Don't forget, in the original version of Dungeons & Dragons, if you didn't have a silver or magic weapon, you had like no chance against wights. Also, they drain your levels if they hit you. That was horrifying.
Oh my god, are you bringing back level drain? Oh, you are one crazy I'm a necromancer and I wouldn't even be that evil.
No. Don't worry, 5th edition players. I didn't bring back level drain, but I did want to use the wights' original invulnerability and their ability to incapacitate heroes to keep the wights horrific and scary. Finally, I decided to set this entire one-shot adventure in the era of the Vikings. I'd like to say I had a really clever reason for doing that, but honestly I just decided Vikings are cool and the concept of haunted barrows are really a good fit in that setting. So, Vikings! Before I go on, I should mention that there are spoilers ahead, so if you might play the last voyage of Draengr Thar, get on your longboat and head back to Scandinavia. Oh, and while you're at it, please go ahead and hit the like and subscribe button because true Vikings respect spoilers, and click that like button. So the original setup with the caravan is completely gone. The new setup is this. A beloved Viking raider, Draengr Thar, gets blown off course in a storm after a successful raid. His boat is terribly damaged and he's badly wounded along with his crew, and they end up stranded up the coast of Norway, far north of any civilization. Draengr dispatches runners to go down to the town of Bjornvin to go get help. So, the PCs are Vikings who live in Bjornvin, and when they hear that Draengr Thar needs their help, they scramble to put together a rescue team. Now, this isn't too different from the original setup, except I think it's more personal to PCs on several levels. One, rescuing somebody like Draengr Thar is an honorable and important mission. It's going to make anybody who pulls it off famous and respected. Two, he does have loot with him, so it's not just a rescue mission. If it all goes wrong, they're going to bring back some treasure from England. Finally, there's no explicit mention of a horrible danger up front. The PCs aren't going in expecting bloodthirsty monsters that dragged off caravan workers in the middle of the night. They don't know what to expect, and not knowing what to expect is an important element of horror. In a horror game, you want to have a slow burn before that insidious evil shows up. So let's talk a little bit more about this slow burn. When the PCs show up to this inlet, they discover no sign of the crew. In fact, Draengr Thar's boat is still there, but it's smashed into splinters, which concerns the guide because the boat was not like that when he left to go get help. And near the boat, the PCs discover a corpse nailed to a tree. This is all about setup to create tension. The PCs arrive and find things slightly amiss. There's a mystery now. Where's Draengr and his crew? And what happened to the boat? And just signs that something has gone bad. Exploring around the inlet, the PCs will discover an old and dilapidated hunting lodge. There are signs that Draengr Thar and his men were here. His sail is on the table being resewn, some belongings are scattered around. No treasure, but the men were definitely here. And weirdly, the fireplace, which is in the shape of this strange pig fish creature, has too much wood in it. It's just spilling out everywhere, almost like a barricade. And there's clues here too. There's the carved word troll on the table in the corner, and a page from a religious manuscript from England has a strange phrase on it.
The king labored and ate from the flesh of the sea Rimnir, and delighted in death.
Again, this is all about setup and tension, and a bit of misdirection. You and I know that this adventure focuses on wights, so the idea that there's a troll in the area will lead the players down the wrong path for a little while. Horror is all about surprise. As the PCs are investigating, they're interrupted by a stranger. An old regal woman has appeared in the woods outside, and she's demanding to know what the PCs are doing in her husband's kingdom. This is Queen Lefina. She's a striking figure. She's also carrying the silver spear, and she has a bloody carcass and a sack over her shoulder, which she says is to feed that hungry troll that lives somewhere in the woods out here, the one that smashed Draengr's ship. The original adventure didn't have any NPCs in it, and I thought it was important to have some to help impart the history of what happened here. Queen Lefina is the first of the NPCs, and she tells the PCs that Draengr Thar arrived and he refused to ask her husband, King Kolbacker, his permission before staying in his lodge. So the king, angry, dragged Draengr Thar and his crew into his tunnels to teach him a lesson. And Draengr and his men are still down there and at the mercy of King Kolbacher. So Queen Lefina's information changes the adventure quite a bit. First, it confirms to the PCs that there is a rescue mission to be performed. Draengr is trapped with his crew below the earth in those barrows that are behind the lodge. They also know that something not natural is going on, but they don't know what. There's definitely intelligence here. And it also adds a timer to the game. The PCs know they only have a short amount of time before this King Kolbacher kills the men that they came to rescue. So now the PCs have some interesting choices to make. First, they have to think about how seriously to take that idea of a troll out in the woods that might come out and smash their boat. Second, they have to figure out what to do with Queen Lefina. She's obviously not on their side, but she's not just attacking them. She just seems to be content watching them and warning them about her husband. And then how do they deal with the tunnels? Do they just charge in there, clearing out the fireplace and leading a big rescue mission? Or do they excavate out a hole, or do they try to sneak in? There's lots of ways that they can approach the troubles of this adventure now. Eventually, of course, the PCs will enter those tunnels, but I wanted them to do so carefully and cautiously, not just hack their way through them like in the original adventure. So one of the first things I did is I hid an unconscious English priest in there. He was a captive taken by Draengr Thar during his last raid. He's barely alive, but when the PCs reach him, he begs them to take him outside because he's discovered more information about this King Kolbacher, and he wants to share. The young priest actually figured out some of the history of what was going on here. This King Kolbacher craved to eat the flesh of Sirimnir. Sirimnir is this strange animal that was reserved for the men and gods of Valhalla. Only they were allowed to eat it. But somehow King Kolbacher found one of the creatures here near his hunting lodge. He butchered it and he ate it, which poisoned him and cursed him so that he and his comrades would return from the dead as wights. The priest explains how Draengr Thar and his crew encountered the wights before, and that the wights are unstoppable, but they might be able to be slain with the purity of silver weapons. Okay, so now the PCs have more information, they have a timer, the men are still trapped down below the earth with the wights, and they have a puzzle on their hands, because none of them are going to have silver weapons on them, and so they're going to need to craft some fast. The adventure includes a few options for doing this. Queen Lefina has her spear, but the PCs will have to find her and steal that from her somehow. And then venturing deeper into the barrows is an option because there's still some scattered treasure from England down there, like silver cups and coins. And so maybe they can make a stealth mission and grab some and then melt them down. And then the troll, because there is a troll actually out in the woods, has some silver in his belly because when he attacked the ship, he just kind of ate everything in sight. Now this whole scramble to find silver and then craft it into silver-edged weapons works really well in a skill-based system like Call of Cthulhu or GURPS because it's this big opportunity for craftsman PCs to save the day. They can build a raging hot fire, melt down the silver, and forge some really cool but improvised weapons to take on those wights. Because a lot of the adventure will take place in the tunnels, I made sure that each of the barrows is more detailed now. Some have old bodies of the ancient dead, others are infested by gross worms that will drop down on the PCs and test their sanity. There's just more of a horror feel to each of the chambers underground. Finally, the PCs will confront King Kolbacher. He's seated at this enormous table in his barrow, where the carcass of one of the Sirimnir creatures rots in front of him. He's nailed Draengr Thar and the last surviving Vikings to his table, punishment for what they did to his wight out in the woods. And he and his wights are slowly killing them to replace the men's souls with that of King Kolbacher's old hunting companions. Now, GMs can run this final confrontation in a few ways. When I ran it, I really played up Kolbacher's intelligence. After all, wights are really smart. He invited them to taste from his rotting Sirimnir, which of course no player would actually do. He also used Draengr as a hostage. He knew he was the most valuable of the Vikings and would keep wights near him to kill him at a moment's notice. He also stalled and taunted and mocked the PCs so that some of his other wight servants would cut around them in the tunnels and ambush them from behind at the right moment. Finally, of course, it all erupted into a big, desperate battle where the PCs barely survived. And wow, did they run from the barrow after that encounter. So that's the summary of the final voyage of Draengr Thar, my reboot of the White adventure in Lords of Darkness. I had fun rebooting this adventure. I think my final result still paid homage to the original, but I really made it my own, and at the end it's pretty different from that first adventure in here. Now, if you found inspiration in a bad adventure, I would love to hear about it. Let me know in the comments below, or if you think there's an adventure I should check out to consider rebooting, I'd like to hear about that too. Don't forget, you can download The Voyage of Draengr Thar for free on my website at oneshotadventures.com. Well, until next time, I'm JC, and remember, don't eat the Serimnir until you're in Valhalla.